Calvin was ready to trust Casey with his life until Neil finally exposed the truth. And after watching the episode 11 trailer, I honestly think this could be the moment that destroys their friendship forever. Because for the first time, Calvin is no longer looking at Casey like a brother. He's looking at him like a criminal. The tension in this trailer feels completely different from anything we've seen before. Secrets are finally coming out, emotions are exploding, and Casey may be forced to choose between protecting the Dutton legacy or saving the people he still cares about. But the scariest part is that once Calvin learns the full truth, there may be no turning back for either of them. So let's break down everything hidden inside the Marshals episode 11 trailer, because this episode looks like the beginning of a war inside the team itself. The episode 11 trailer picks up right where the shocking ending of episode 10 left us. Neil Lamb is still alive, and honestly, that changes everything for Casey. Up until now, Casey always managed to stay one step ahead of every problem. No matter how dangerous the situation became, he always found a way to control it before things got worse. But now the situation feels completely different, because this time, the danger is not coming from enemies outside the group. It's coming from the truth itself. Neil knows too much, and the trailer makes it very clear that he plans to use every secret he has against Casey and the Dutton family. What makes this even more dangerous is that Calvin is finally there to hear it all for himself. One thing Marshals has done really well this season is showing how strong Casey and Calvin's friendship became over time. Calvin trusted Casey even during moments when things looked suspicious. Whenever Casey acted strange or disappeared during important situations, Calvin always gave him the benefit of the doubt because he truly believed Casey was a good man deep down. But episode 11 feels like the moment where that trust finally begins to collapse. The trailer gives us several tense moments between them. And honestly, I don't remember ever seeing Calvin look this disappointed before. It's not just anger on his face, it's betrayal. That emotional shift is what makes this episode feel so important. The biggest moment in the trailer is definitely when Neil looks at Calvin and asks, "Do you want to hear a story?" That line alone completely changes the atmosphere, because Neil is no longer acting like a scared prisoner trying to escape. Instead, he suddenly becomes dangerous in a completely different way. He realizes the best weapon he has is information. Neil knows that if he can destroy Calvin's trust in Casey, he might create enough chaos to survive. And honestly, from the way the trailer is edited, it looks like his plan is actually working. We see Calvin slowly starting to question everything he thought he knew about Casey and the Dutton family. What makes this situation even more intense is that Neil is not simply accusing Casey of one crime. He's exposing an entire history of violence and corruption connected to Yellowstone. The trailer strongly hints that Neil knows about several illegal actions tied to the Dutton family, and Calvin clearly struggles to process what he's hearing. For someone like Calvin, this is devastating because he built his entire partnership with Casey on loyalty and trust. Now he's realizing that Casey may have hidden huge secrets from him the entire time. That's why the line, "Aren't you just gangsters on horseback?" feels so powerful. It's probably one of the most important lines of the season because it shows Calvin finally seeing the darker side of the world Casey comes from. At the same time, Casey's reaction tells us a lot about his emotional state. Instead of calmly denying the accusations, Casey immediately becomes defensive and angry. When he says, "At least we fight to the end for each other," it sounds less like an explanation and more like a warning. Casey truly believes loyalty matters more than laws. That belief has defined his entire character from the beginning. Even when he knows something is wrong, he still protects the people he considers family. But Calvin doesn't think that way anymore. He still believes justice should mean something. And now both men are finally realizing that they stand on opposite sides of the same battle. Honestly, I think this is exactly why the trailer feels so emotional. This is not a simple argument between partners. This feels like the slow destruction of a brotherhood. Throughout the season, Casey and Calvin survived impossible situations together. They trusted each other during shootouts, dangerous operations, and personal tragedies. That history is what makes this conflict hurt even more. You can tell neither of them wants things to end this way, but the truth is forcing them into a position where somebody eventually has to choose a side. Another important detail in the trailer is how isolated Casey suddenly looks compared to earlier episodes. Before this, Casey always had some level of emotional support around him. But now, almost every relationship in his life feels unstable. Garrett is badly injured after the barn fire, Andrea is becoming emotionally attached to Garrett, and Calvin is slowly pulling away from him after hearing Neil's story. Even the way Casey looks in the trailer feels different. He seems exhausted, angry, and emotionally cornered. It honestly feels like the pressure of protecting the Dutton secrets is finally becoming too heavy for him to carry alone. At the same time, I think the trailer quietly hints that Dolly may become one of the most important people in Casey's life moving forward. Their scenes are brief, but the emotional energy between them is very noticeable. Dolly seems genuinely worried about Casey, especially after seeing how much pressure he's under. Unlike Calvin, she doesn't immediately judge him for his mistakes. She understands that Casey is carrying years of grief and emotional trauma after losing Monica. That's probably why Casey feels more comfortable around her now. Dolly gives him something he desperately needs right now, and that is emotional peace. I also think the writers are slowly building Casey and Dolly toward a much bigger relationship. Earlier in the season, Casey was emotionally distant from almost everyone because he was still trapped in his grief. But now we're starting to see him opening up again little by little. The timing also makes sense because Casey is emotionally vulnerable after everything happening with Calvin and Neil. Losing Calvin's trust could push Casey even closer to Dolly because he needs someone who still believes in him. But at the same time, getting emotionally close to Casey could place Dolly in serious danger. Anyone connected to the Dutton family eventually gets pulled into chaos. And Marshals has already shown us how destructive that world can become. Meanwhile, the trailer also hints that Garrett's storyline is far from over. After risking his life during the barn fire, Garrett became one of the most respected characters on the show almost instantly. Running into burning flames to save the horses proved exactly what kind of man he really is. And now, while recovering in the hospital, it looks like his relationship with Andrea may finally become more serious. Andrea clearly sees Garrett differently after what happened. Earlier in the season, her connection with Casey felt more like curiosity and emotional confusion. But with Garrett, the connection feels more genuine and emotional. The trailer suggests Andrea will stay close to him during his recovery. And honestly, I think their relationship may become one of the emotional highlights of episode 11. But even while all these personal relationships continue developing, the real emotional core of this episode is still the growing conflict between Casey and Calvin. Every conversation between them feels heavier now because both men know their friendship may never recover after this. And honestly, the scariest part is that Neil may only be revealing the beginning of the truth. One thing that makes the episode 11 trailer so intense is how every single storyline suddenly feels connected to the same central problem. The truth about the Dutton family is no longer something hidden in the background. It's now affecting every relationship around Casey, and the pressure is slowly pushing him toward a breaking point. What really stood out to me while watching the trailer is that Casey no longer looks confident the way he usually does. Earlier in the season, even during dangerous moments, Casey always stayed calm and controlled. But now there's fear underneath his anger. And honestly, I think that fear comes from realizing he may finally lose Calvin forever. The trailer strongly suggests that Calvin spends a large part of episode 11 trying to understand whether Neil is telling the truth or simply manipulating him. That internal conflict is probably going to become one of the most emotional parts of the episode. Because Calvin does not want to believe Casey is the kind of man Neil describes. He wants to believe there's another explanation. But the problem is that Casey's behavior is only making things worse. Instead of opening up honestly, Casey keeps reacting emotionally and defensively. From Calvin's perspective, that probably feels like proof that Neil is telling the truth. There's one quick moment in the trailer where Calvin looks completely stunned while staring at Casey, and honestly, I think that scene happens right after Neil exposes one of the Dutton family's biggest secrets. The show hasn't fully explained every crime connected to Yellowstone yet, but episode 11 might finally start revealing how deep everything really goes. Neil was a former Yellowstone employee, which means he likely witnessed things nobody else outside the ranch ever saw. He understands how the family operates, how problems disappear, and how loyalty inside that world often matters more than morality. That's exactly why Casey looks so desperate in the trailer. He knows once Calvin hears everything, there's no way to erase it. At the same time, I think Casey himself is emotionally conflicted. Deep down, Casey probably understands that some of the things connected to the Dutton legacy are wrong. But he was raised inside that world for so long that loyalty became more important to him than justice. That's why his argument with Calvin feels so tragic. Neither man is fully evil, but both believe they're right. Calvin believes laws should protect innocent people no matter what. Casey believes protecting family is the only thing that matters when the world turns dangerous. And now those two beliefs are finally crashing into each other. Honestly, the writers deserve credit because they didn't make this conflict simple. It would have been easy to make Casey look completely guilty or Calvin look completely innocent, but instead the trailer shows both characters struggling emotionally. You can tell Casey is terrified of losing the only real friendship he has left. And you can also tell Calvin is heartbroken because the man he trusted most may have lied to him from the beginning. That emotional complexity is exactly why this storyline feels so powerful compared to other dramas. Another major moment teased in the trailer is the frozen lake sequence. And I honestly think this scene could become one of the biggest turning points of the season. We briefly see Calvin falling through thin ice into freezing water, and the way the trailer cuts that moment makes it look extremely dangerous. For a few seconds, it honestly feels like Calvin might die. But what interests me most is not whether Calvin survives. It's who saves him. And I think the answer is clearly Casey. The reason this moment matters so much is because it perfectly represents their relationship. Even after all the anger, betrayal, and accusations, Casey still cannot abandon Calvin. No matter how broken their friendship becomes, Casey still sees him as family. I think Casey jumping into freezing water to save Calvin could become one of the most emotional scenes in the entire series. Because in that moment, actions speak louder than words. Casey may not know how to explain himself emotionally, but risking his own life to save Calvin would prove that his loyalty to him was always real. But at the same time, saving Calvin probably won't fix everything, and honestly, that's what makes the situation so heartbreaking. Trust is much harder to repair once it's broken. Even if Casey saves Calvin's life, Calvin may still feel unable to ignore everything Neil revealed. That's why I think episode 11 will end with their friendship hanging by a thread instead of fully repairing itself. The emotional damage feels too deep now. Meanwhile, another storyline quietly becoming more important is Andrea and Garrett's growing relationship. After Garrett nearly died saving the horses, Andrea clearly started seeing him differently. Earlier in the season, Garrett mostly stayed in the background emotionally. People respected him, but nobody fully understood him. Episode 10 changed that completely. Garrett's bravery during the fire revealed the kind of person he truly is underneath his quiet personality. And now Andrea seems more emotionally connected to him than ever before. The trailer hints that Andrea visits Garrett during his recovery, and honestly, these scenes could become some of the softer emotional moments in an otherwise dark episode. Andrea has spent most of the season emotionally guarded, especially after everything she experienced personally. But Garrett gives her a sense of safety and honesty that she doesn't seem to find anywhere else. Their relationship feels more natural now because it's built on mutual respect rather than emotional confusion. At the same time, I do think the show may create more emotional tension around Garrett's injuries. The trailer repeatedly reminds viewers how serious the fire damage really was, especially the lung injuries. That detail feels important because Marshals usually doesn't focus on medical consequences unless they plan to use them later emotionally. There's a real possibility Garrett's condition worsens unexpectedly during episode 11, which would emotionally devastate Andrea right when she finally started opening her heart to someone again. Another character who continues becoming more interesting is Belle. After learning the truth about her parents and reconnecting emotionally with her mother, Belle feels like a completely different person now. Earlier in the season, she always carried emotional walls around her. She kept people at a distance because of the guilt and pain connected to her family's past. But now those walls are finally starting to break. The trailer shows her participating in another dangerous operation with Andrea, but emotionally she feels calmer and more focused than before. I actually think Belle's backstory may become even more important moving forward because her story mirrors Casey's situation in an interesting way. Both characters are struggling with family legacies that carry darkness and guilt. The difference is that Belle is finally trying to escape that pain and define herself differently, while Casey still feels trapped inside the Dutton legacy. That contrast could become very important later in the season. One small detail I noticed in the trailer is that Belle seems more protective of Andrea now too. After everything they went through together involving Belle's mother, their friendship feels stronger than before. And honestly, Marshals has done a really good job building believable emotional connections between characters instead of rushing relationships too quickly. That's part of what makes the emotional moments hit harder when conflict happens. But no matter how emotional the other storylines become, everything still leads back to Casey and Calvin. The trailer constantly returns to their conflict because the entire future of the team may depend on what happens between them. If Calvin fully turns against Casey after learning the truth, it could completely destroy the trust holding the Marshals together. And the scary part is that Casey himself may already know this is coming. What makes the Marshals episode 11 trailer feel so different from previous episodes is that this time the danger feels emotional before it feels physical. Usually the show focuses on shootouts, fugitives, rescue missions, and dangerous operations. But now the biggest threat is trust falling apart inside the team itself. And honestly, that kind of conflict is much more dangerous because once people stop trusting each other, every decision becomes unpredictable. The trailer constantly creates this feeling that the entire foundation holding the Marshals together is starting to crack, and Casey is standing right in the middle of it. One thing I noticed immediately is that Casey looks completely exhausted throughout the trailer. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally drained. He's spent the entire season carrying secrets while also trying to protect the people around him. But now everything is catching up to him all at once. Neil's escape, Calvin's growing suspicions, Garrett's injuries, and the pressure connected to the Dutton family are all collapsing together at the worst possible time. And honestly, I think Casey is starting to realize there may not be a way out anymore. The interesting part is that Casey never truly looks scared for himself. Instead, he looks scared about what the truth will do to the people around him. That's why his reactions toward Calvin feel so emotional. He knows Calvin is one of the few genuinely good people left in his life. Losing him would hurt more than almost anything else. But at the same time, Casey also knows he cannot completely abandon the Dutton family, no matter how dark their secrets become. That internal struggle is probably going to define his entire character arc moving forward. The trailer also suggests that Calvin begins investigating things more seriously after hearing Neil's story. There are several quick shots where Calvin appears isolated from the rest of the team, almost like he's mentally separating himself from Casey already. And honestly, that emotional distance may become even more painful than their arguments. Sometimes silence between characters says more than shouting ever could. Calvin looks like someone whose entire reality has been shaken. Everything he believed about Casey suddenly feels uncertain. I think one of the smartest things the writers did was making Calvin emotionally mature instead of reckless. A weaker version of this storyline would have shown Calvin instantly turning against Casey without hesitation. But that's not what the trailer shows at all. Instead, Calvin looks heartbroken. He doesn't want Casey to be guilty. He wants proof that Neil is lying. That emotional conflict makes his scenes much more powerful because viewers understand exactly why he's struggling so much. At the same time, Neil himself is becoming far more dangerous than people originally expected. Earlier, he just looked like another escaped prisoner trying to survive. But episode 11 reveals he's actually one of the biggest threats Casey has faced all season. Not because of physical violence, but because he understands exactly where to attack emotionally. Neil knows Casey's greatest weakness is not fear or danger. It's the people he cares about. By exposing secrets to Calvin, Neil is basically destroying Casey's emotional support system piece by piece.